Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and as you know, I love to bring to you guests who have worked on their own development as leaders and then also are very committed to helping others grow as leaders too. And I'm excited that my guest today has done both of those throughout her entire career. And I would like to welcome her to my show. Terry Yoffe, welcome.
Hello, Meredith. This is such an honor and such a pleasure to be here with you. And everything you talked about, my favorite subjects is how can you create change.
Yes, you're such a wizard at that. And I'm really looking forward to getting into that. I want to first acknowledge Sejal Thacker, who is a super connector and wonderful friend who brought us together. And I'm so grateful that she did, because you and I have so many areas that we're both passionate about and have in common. And this is going to be a wonderful conversation. So first, let me tell my listeners a little bit about you before we jump into our conversation. Terry is an executive business and career coach. She's been coaching for more than 20 years after many years in both corporate and entrepreneurial roles. In her role as a coach, Terry helps her clients maximize their talents and achieve their full potential. And she does this by employing a two-step process, having the clients clarify their goals and then developing a focused strategic plan that helps them reach those goals. And Terry, you didn't start out as a coach. You have this wonderful, extensive, and varied background that I think enriches a person's experience when they get to work with you. So give us just a short tour of some of the things that led up to your deciding that coaching was really something you were really passionate about.
I'm going to try to keep it very short. Otherwise, I could go on for days. So I grew up stuttering with not a lot of confidence. And never in 20 million years would I have ever thought I would be sitting here for all the things I have done in my life. There was, I think, just a fire in me. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no game plan. I think the universe had one, though. And I started out in fashion. I was in several fabric companies. I started doing fashion shows, so I was always up in the public eye. And when that fell apart, which I've had several jobs where I was fired, I had to figure out what I needed to do. And I never felt I had time to do a pity party. Ironically enough, even though I wanted to, I just said, get up and move. And when I left the fabric industry and fashion, happenstance, a woman I knew in the fashion world had a position at Women's Wear Daily. She was the publisher. And she reached out to me and said, I have this position, New England territory manager, taking over a $600,000 territory. I said, that sounds great. I have nothing about sales, nothing, had no sales experience. She said, I don't care, you know fashion. And there were two roads. One, I could have said, oh no, my fears, right? That inner, but what are you doing? What are you crazy? You're going to look like a jerk. You're going to fail. Or the other voice, which I did, I said, sure, why not? That became my motto. No clue. Jumped on that platform that rose in front of me. And in 3 years, took a $600,000 territory to $1.3 million. Did amazingly well for somebody that had no sales experience. And then I decided to leave. For me, it was all about money at that time. And, they had a scale and they kept pushing it back that, you had to do so much more to get your incremental monies, right? And so it turned out, which it always has. I was at a luncheon and some woman sitting next to me said, I'm at the New Yorker, Condé Nast. I'm looking for somebody in the fashion. I'd love to talk to you. I spoke to her. I went for the interviews, never thought I would make it. And yes, they hired me. So from there, I went to the fashion area in Condé Nast. The person that hired me turned out to be a disaster. She was very difficult. As soon as I got there, for some reason, she tried to fire me. So I was up against that. And my husband said, well, why don't you just leave? Why are you staying? I said, because I didn't do anything wrong. So the end result was they let her go and kept me. And I was moved to fashion to travel and grew that business by so much and was there in that area for 9 years, 8 years. And then I went to another magazine and was there for a while. And my husband for a long time had said to me, you should go into your own business. You should be a hired gun. And I kept poo-pooing it. And I stayed at Condé because of the golden handcuffs. Very hard to leave when you're doing phenomenally well and making a very nice amount of money. I said, one day, I'm done. Actually, people started calling me and said, look, I'd love to have you. Would you come as a consultant? I had 2 people do that. And I said, done, gone. I'm on my way. And as I said, I got in a rowboat and I kept moving off the shore, kept looking back and said, you know what? What's the worst that can happen? And I tell my clients this all the time. You've got to be willing to let go of the trapeze and just be in the air, because that's where the growth comes, right? Before you grab another trapeze. And I was in my own business, did very well because people knew me. I had a great reputation. And then that dried up. I didn't know what to do. I thought about it. And I had spent many years in analysis, 3 times a week on a couch. I did a lot of modalities into the human mind. I did a Buddhist retreat. I became very interested in Buddhism and spirituality. And as I started looking at what I wanted to do, I thought I'd go back to school, become a therapist, because I just loved working with myself and talking to others and getting really into them. Going back to school was a long process. And so I stumbled on coaching, which was a kissing cousin, if you will. Mm-hmm. And there I went from being at the apex to being in the basement. I had to start over. I went back to school and I was not young. I was not 12 by any means. And I went to CTI and I got my certificate for being a coach. And then that just wasn't enough for me. So I went on for my 6-month certification. And you had to take an oral and a written test. And I passed. And I joined the ICF New York chapter and went from secretary to treasurer to president. And here I am, 20 years later. I have my CPCC, which is my certification, and my PCC from ICF. That was my journey, as quickly as I could tell it, to becoming a coach. It was never in my crystal ball, ever.
Well, to me, the thing that makes a coach so effective is their life experiences, because you've been in so many different kinds of positions, and you've had to overcome a number of fears and obstacles yourself over time.
Exactly.
And I think that makes you so relatable as a coach. It's hard to be effective with others if you have no sense of what their experience really is, and you've been through that yourself. And I thank you for all the different pieces that you shared, because they come together to make this amazing powerhouse, to me, of a coach in guiding your own clients. And one thing to me, because I want to talk to you about the communication skills, you and I share a passion around that, and you help them with communication skills in very specific situations. For yourself, you mentioned, all these different times when you just jumped for it. You made the leap into the unknown. And I'd love to hear you share a little bit first about your own path in overcoming fear. Because just thinking of your experience in sales, where you said you had no experience, and here you need to ask people for things. So making asks, dealing with no. So all these fears that people often have around the sales process. What did you do? How did you learn to make all that work?
I wish I could answer that. Honestly, I think growing up, I had so many fears about not being worthy, about not being good enough. I was in a relationship, this is way back, for a really long time, and we were going to get married, and he broke it off. And even though I was devastated because I never thought anyone would love me or care about me, he broke it off, and I took the money and went to Europe for 2 months. I somehow, again, Meredith, I wish I could truly explain it. There is a drive in me that's very hard to explain. I think it was there when I was younger, growing up, and I knew I had to leave Queens. And when I had the opportunity, I moved into the city and really grew up there, not under the watchful eye of my mother. I lived in the city. I did some crazy things. Even the jobs, I took what I had to pay my rent. I had to take care of myself. I spent a good amount of time. Somebody would say, I know there's an open position, is an open desk at a real estate company that you can go in and do listings. Okay, I'm doing it. Or some friend of mine said, I could use you to do some marketing. I'm doing it. I never said no. It didn't matter whether I was just crazy and didn't see it, or, and that's how I got by. I got fired several times, and it's not pleasant. I would cry and get upset, and then that drive would kick in and a door would open. And it's something I can't explain. Actually, on my podcast, my most recent one with Craig Siegel, he said, what do you think keeps you going? You could retire. You could have a great life. But yet here you are starting a podcast 2.5 years ago, still moving forward, still doing. I said, I can't tell you. I still have a drive. I have a voice. And I think I always knew that, even when I stuttered, that there is something more to be said and done. I don't know if that makes any sense to you or to anyone.
But I think it does. It does, Terry, because to me, what I'm taking away from what you've just shared is this indomitable spirit that you have, no matter what you have faced, you have looked at it as an opportunity to grow, to learn. And so you've taken something from each one of those situations and used it for whatever the next opportunity was.
I think, as I think about it, going through analysis 3 times a week for 7 years, the amount of pain and challenges I had and what I went through to drop the veils, right? One by one by one, was so excruciating that I got through it. And I think somewhere in me, if I could get through that, and my doctor did not believe in Valium or any medication, if I could get through that, Lord be, I could get through anything. And I think in a way that set me up for being willing to accept what's in front of me. And as you mentioned, and thank you, as a coach, there isn't a door I haven't opened that I can't relate to with a client. And I get everything from A to Z and anything in between.
That's an important point. So let's dive in now to the work you do with clients and get specific about what are some of the issues around communication skills that you find they struggle with and that you've been able to help them with.
I had a client early on. She was so negative. She had no clue, no idea in the world that this was a pattern until I brought it to her attention. And she stopped dead in her tracks and said, "What?" Didn't hear herself. Another client did great work and was called on the carpet because she didn't know how to get along with the people in her group. Not for her work, for her emotional state. And anything in between. People who are giving presentations. How do you get up on stage and deal with the fear and the vulnerability? How, we all have that when we get up on stage, and you have to let it be there and not focus on it or advocating for yourself. I had people come to me who are too afraid to advocate for themselves, and that's a fear. What if? What if I don't do a good job? What if they fire me? What if they don't like what I have to say? And you have to look at, it's not what we're seeing, it's the underlying that is what gets in their way for everybody in communication. People think talking and regurgitating is communication. I'm sorry. It's, as my husband said, you're a very thoughtful speaker, even on your podcast. You're very controlled in a way on, I think about it unconsciously as I'm talking. I think that just comes from my past. Mm-hmm. And what am I going to say? It's very intentional communication. Very intentional. Communication is all about influencing and persuading, period. Especially in the business world. That's what it's about. Being able to work with people, getting your ideas out there.
Mm-hmm.
What does it take? As we both know, a lot of what skills go into good communication.
Yes. And so thinking about when somebody comes to you and with your familiarity with therapy, this idea of the quote, presenting problem, but there are other things behind it or beneath it. Thinking of my listeners that may have their own fears of various things, what are some questions they might ask themselves? What are some of the things you bring up with your clients that help them open up to exploring at a deeper level?
I might start with, what do you think gets in the way of being able to present well? Getting, I'll make this up, getting up on stage, shaking, because we all do that, right? It's normal. How to overcome it. What's the worst thing that can happen? The very worst thing. You flub, you lose a line. You just go on. People don't know. People don't pay that much attention, to be honest. And it's helping them gain confidence, because if they're doing it on stage, they are doing it other places.
Yeah. The idea of not feeling comfortable advocating for themselves. I'm sure, and you probably could share a specific example, kind of a before, during, and after. What is it that someone was hesitant to speak up about? What did you help them learn to do? And then what did they do differently as a result of their work with you?
I had a recent client that was not happy with where she was. It was a small company, and she really had to advocate for getting a new title, more money, etc. And she kept telling us, "That's okay. I won't rock the boat." And we spent a lot of our sessions looking at how she could put something together, whether it's a plan, a strategic plan, and how to present it. One of the things I do talk about is, I call it the overall objective. What's your desired outcome if you're going into talk? That's the headline. And then you start at the bottom and you think about what you need to say to reach that desired outcome. So if you are looking at raise, just make that up. She was looking at both, how to be more part of the company. And what we looked at, one was going in and letting them know and showing them what she's already done, how there is an ROI, return on investment, and the overview of what she's done and what she's doing, and how can she take on more. And that took time for her. And it took a long time for her to go in and to ask. But you don't just go in and say, by the way, this is what, you've got to do an overall strategy, and letting them know how valuable and important you are to their company and their ROI and the clients and everything else. And without you, them, they would be at a detriment and a loss. So you have to paint a picture.
And so what happened?
She wound up doing it. She wound up going in and figuring out what to say. And it was small. We worked on incremental ways to get started. How could she take on more business? She was bringing in business. What could she do? And they gave her more work. And then she went back in and did another profile of herself. And, we just kept drilling down and drilling down. And, by the end, she went in, stated her case, what she wanted, and she got it. But there's a strategy. She had to be smarter than him.
And,
In a way.
Terry, what you're helping people do is kind of zoom out, because often they're in the weeds of the work they're doing, and you're helping them take a step back, it sounds like, to look at the big picture. And also this whole thing of valuing ourselves. As a coach, I'm guessing with all your years of experience, this is probably a common thing that comes up, is people undervalue, especially if you're working with a lot of women, which I think you do, the undervaluing of their contributions, of even their worth as a person. Is that something you see a lot of?
My theory, and it's mine alone, that everybody has a thread of unworthiness, not valued, not liked. It's just there. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If that's how you feel, that's what's going to show up in your life. And it's getting to that, being worthy, being valued. What does that mean? What does it look like? Where aren't you showing that? I had a woman years ago that worked 100 hours a day because that's how she thought she showed her value, by overachieving.
Mm.
And people will play out in so many scenarios of how they try to show their value, their worthiness, and everything in between. So it's really getting to what makes them feel unworthy, what makes them feel not lovable, likable, not valued. People that take jobs that are in toxic environments and they stay. I mean, there's a laundry list, as you know, of reasons why people go into situations that are definitely not in their best interest, and yet they stay.
Mm-hmm. And I would think that that is a large part of your work. The actions they take are a direct reflection of the work you help them do on themselves first. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I'm always asking them to turn their eyes inward. You can't do work on yourself if you're only looking out there. It's got to be in here. So people come to us as coaches, they want to go from point A to point B. Well, what's stopping them? What's that in the middle that they can't seem to figure out? And a lot of it, my experience, is there's some wound, there's some trauma, there's some not good enough that stops them. Actually, I had a woman on recently, Kelly Campbell, who just wrote a book, Heal to Lead. It's all about, she's a trauma-informed coach. And when I do my podcast, I kind of pull out an opening, just kind of oh my God, a few words from the person. And hers started with, all leaders are just wounded kids. It was a great interview, but we all have trauma, wounds, the pandemic of not good enough. And that's how we live our lives.
So
my philosophy.
Yeah, no, I I think there's a lot of truth to that, especially in environments where there's a lot of hurting going on, hurting others. It comes from our own hurts. People who feel the need to lash out are acting out something from their past, no
Absolutely.
doubt. So it takes patience, I would think, on your part as a coach to help people explore these areas that maybe they haven't looked at before. Do you
It's a
find that
process.
that requires patience on your part to do
It
that?
does. However, if you'll ask a lot of my clients, the one thing I'll say to them is stop with the stories. Stories don't get us anywhere. I mean, they're very funny, some of them. They'll say, oh, Terry said no stories. Because what happens is people want to go on and tell their story. Adds nothing to, because they get stuck in the story. And you got to get that story out of the way, right? It's somebody that didn't go for vice president of something. They really wanted it. They truly wanted it. Oh, well, it take up too much time. I'm probably not ready for it. They'll never see me as a vice. That's a story. That's a story that they're hiding from something underneath that. You have to, as a coach, we have to be willing to hear what's not going on, what's there in the atmosphere.
That really is such an important skill, that knowing what to pay attention to and listen for and what is said and not being said. And, this whole idea of stories, I think, is so basic because we all have them. It's our beliefs about something that we are certain is true, but it sounds like you help them uh, move through or past some of those stories they have in order to step into what's really possible for them.
And it takes time. People don't want to let go, and I coach by phone. And one of my clients said, why don't you do Zoom? Why do you do phone? I said, it's very simple. Most people, if you're looking at them, they're always wondering, what is she going to say? Did I say the right thing? If I move my head one way, so their focus gets lost on me. And if they don't see me, I can hear in their voice how they're doing. I don't need to see them. And I have had clients that cry. They hit upon something that they've kept squashed down, that all of a sudden confronts them, like all of us, and they start to cry. And they're in the safety of their environment. And I tell them, just cry, let it out. What are you holding it in for? Oh, I think as coaches, we are responsible, just me, being part of ICF for over 20 years, for really doing the right thing by our clients, whatever that means. You can't be a good coach and not be willing to challenge them to a point where, they hang up on you or say something, but it needs to be said.
I think that goes back to the trust that you establish with them early on, because if they trust that you have their best interest at heart, unless you really hit a nerve with them, they're unlikely to hang up on you. They're more likely to sit with it and process that with you so that they come out better. Because one of your whole areas of expertise, Terry, is this change, helping people change from a place of, let's say, pain or discomfort to becoming who they really want to be. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how do you encourage them to create the changes that they want to see?
Well, I would assume that, and I really learned that. I do a 3-hour intake, I call it. I break it up into 2 parts. I used to do it in person, but I don't anymore. So I do a Zoom and I give them questions to play with. I do a disc and a welcome letter that outlines everything. I get pretty clear about a person before when I look at the results of their disc and their questions, even before they get on the Zoom call to go through the intake. And for them to understand that this is a process. There's no quick fixes. And are they willing to show up for whatever comes up? And some are, most have been. And it's, it's not easy. It's not easy to change your vessel, so to speak. One of the things I learned in therapy is you're dealing with the human mind, which is a piece of machinery, and its job is to keep you safe. And it doesn't know that you've grown up. So when you start to make changes, that mind jumps to attention and wait a second, and they will sabotage you. That mind sabotages because it wants to keep you safe. And you go to battle literally with that. And we work on how do you not listen to that voice? Because it's part of your DNA. It doesn't go away. It's our job to lower the volume and to raise the volume on who we want to be, what are our accomplishments, what are our goals. And the more that volume gets louder and you can lower the volume on the other, then the shift starts to take place. I still have triggers, but that's what they are. And you have to be aware.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I was going to ask you for your own growth and development, not just as a coach, but as a human being. What are some of the things you're still learning and finding opportunities to stretch into?
My podcast was one. I had never done that. I don't know where I came up with it. And the universe concurred. I had the opportunity to be on a podcast in 20 or 21. And I said, okay. And I worked with somebody to put it together. We did the whole thing. And I said, it's either going to work or not. Either it's going to work and I'll move forward. And if it doesn't define me. That's the other thing. As who I am as a human and as a coach. It's just didn't work. And the minute I got clear on that, I went along. It's done phenomenally well. I'm in my 3rd year. As you know, I'm thrilled that you will be on my podcast, not too in the distant future. It's moving so quickly.
Well, share the name of your podcast.
Oh, yes. It's called Extraordinary Work, Conversations about Creating Change. It's all about creating change. As a coach, I create change. My podcast, I do a TV show with another coach called Coaches Creating Change. It's all about creating change and making a difference and being willing to make those changes.
One of the things I just so admire about you, Terry, is all these different things that you've taken on, you didn't have a roadmap for them. You had to, create the path yourself to figure out, what do I need to do here?
Right.
There's just all these different roles you've described during our conversation here, but the latest one being the podcast journey, and you've done beautifully with it. You've learned another way to apply your wonderful communication skills with people and drawing out their wisdom and sharing that with an audience. So I love all the ways that you've been, having such a positive impact in the world with
Thank
your
you.
coaching,
Very important.
helping people really come to understand what their capabilities are as you've continued to discover them within yourself. Because I'm guessing as a podcast host now, you have discovered some strengths you have that you may not have either recognized or given yourself credit for, but have obviously emerged in the process.
Well, to be fair, when I was president of the ICF, we did a TV show with MNN only in New York. And I was a host and I did interview people. So I kind of had a little bit of a taste of it way back when I would do that. And, it was very different, but I would be interviewing. I did that for several years. So I kind of had a training in it.
Yes.
And getting up and doing presentations and fashion shows and giving presentations. I was also in an organization called AWNY, Advertising Women of New York, and I helped co-founder a mentoring program. So every year we'd put on a presentation. We'd invite people and I'd get up and I would be the host of it. So I have had many years of being in the public eye.
What you just said struck me, and that is, too often we don't consciously go back and think about what have been some of our successes, what have been some of these skills that we've developed that we can bring to this new situation that we find ourselves in, so we don't feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. But in fact, you did, because of those activities you just described that you had done before. I think that's a great point to end on, is encouraging people to consider any new opportunity you face or challenge. What have you done in the past that can serve you today as you embark on that new adventure, we'll call it?
I call it bankable nuggets. That you can go back from day one and bring all of those bankable nuggets into the present. So
that's a great term. I like that. Well, Terry, thank you so much for being with me today. Tell my audience how they can connect with you and learn more about your coaching work.
You can find me at my website, www.trycoaching.com. You can also hear my podcasts, Extraordinary Work, Conversations About Creating Change. They are on my website. They're on Apple Podcasts. And you can always reach out to me by email, terry@trycoaching.com. I would welcome a conversation, even just an exploratory.
Great. Well, Terry, thank you again for joining me today. It's been so fun to just travel through your experiences in life as well as your work with clients. I just love the work you're doing, and I appreciate you.
Meredith, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here and so very appreciative. It means so much to me, truly.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.